Recently, after reading a certain book by Thomas Sowell, I began to take stock of some political and ideological trends I have noticed with a new appreciation and perhaps a better understanding. This new outlook comes from seeing the impasse of opposing political visions as stemming from either a constrained or unconstrained vision of humanity. The book in question is A Conflict of Visions, and this video will serve as a summary of some of the points in that book in the context of the current political landscape. I should preface this video with a suggestion of reading the book yourself. It is well worth it in my opinion. We'll be looking at the subject in 3 parts. Part 1 will be about the mutually exclusive foundational assumptions that create the duality of the two world visions. Part 2 will focus on how those assumptions have shaped divergent views of mankind's role in politics, economics, and law. And Part 3 will be a short examination of what these visions look like in our modern world. Part 1. The foundational difference between visions. A tale of two visions. Early in the book, Thomas Sowell suggests that any argument or debate that has at its center the same evidence, but wildly differing conclusions, can't be easily explained by any other means than a fundamental differing in worldview. It is not how logic is applied in these circumstances, or even the particulars of the evidence in question. The important criteria for deciding how one sees an issue is a foundational one. The criteria of vision. This is true, by Sowell's assertion, whether it be in the political or economic arena. But before we talk about the difference in the assumptions made by the different visions, perhaps it would be best to define what Thomas Sowell means by vision. A vision, as the term is used here, is not a dream, a hope, a prophecy, or a moral imperative, though any of these things may ultimately derive from some particular vision. Here, a vision is a sense of causation. A vision, as Sowell describes it, is an intuition or assumption about basic elements of human nature and, more specifically, when that same nature is seen as a causal factor for good or ill. The perceived limits, or lack thereof, of this nature are what then make that vision either of the constrained or unconstrained variety. The unconstrained vision is a view of humanity as being essentially good, or moral. In accordance with this perceived ideal nature comes a view that any undesired elements in humans are in need of explanation. This vision also sees human capability as near limitless. This meaning that a more perfect or ideal type of human could exist, and by extension a more ideal society or culture. People of this vision may believe in the possibility of solutions to any given social problem. This vision is summed up well in Sowell's quote of William Godwin. Men are capable, no doubt, of preferring an inferior interest of their own to a superior interest of others. But this preference arises from a combination of circumstances and is not the necessary and invariable law of our nature. Godwin, as made obvious in the quote, believed in the inherent goodness or moral essence of man. The constrained vision is an assumption of the opposite. It is an inclination of seeing mankind as limited in its abilities, and that its nobler elements warrant explanation, while its baser tendencies are all too natural and are only tempered by a series of ever-evolving social trade-offs. Utopian societies are seen as impossibilities, as the best one of this vision could hope for is a more desirable series of trade-offs. In this vision, there are no solutions, only more optimum compromise. Sowell quotes Edmund Burke to highlight this view. We cannot change the nature of things and of men, but must act upon them the best we can. The last quote also emphasizes another important fundamental schism between the two visions, that of the differing view of the mutability of human nature. People of the unconstrained vision often see human nature as a transformable characteristic, a thing that can be perfected through better application of logic and reason, whereas those of the constrained vision see human nature as being somewhat fixed, a thing to be wrestled with through systems of trade-offs and incentives. The last foundational element of the two visions that we will touch on is the locus of power, or decision-making, assumed to be most beneficial in each vision. These concentrations of decision-making are necessarily different as each vision sees the world from quite differing perspectives, with differing causations for social ills, and differing views on the abilities of man to repair these supposed ills. The unconstrained vision, as Sowell asserts, finds more centralized forms of governance more appealing, as it would allow for more morally just or knowledgeable humans, an enlightened class, to guide human development in its betterment and the attaining of a conceived social good. The constrained visionaries, by contrast, would prefer the decisions to be made in a more free market style, as those with this vision see the sum total knowledge of any given society as being orders of magnitude more than any group of professed intellectuals within that society, and thus that same society as a whole is viewed as being more capable of making those decisions through the culmination of personal decision-making, acknowledging the inherent limitation of man's abilities, and allowing for the evolved processes of a society, its traditions and culture, laws and economics, forming a complex ecosystem of reward and punishments that at best can hope to arrive at better standards of living for the flawed organism known as man. Now that we have a rough idea of the basics of each vision, we can take a look at the way this dichotomy is played out and the arguments in which these opposing visions have often been at odds. Part 2. On freedom, justice, and equality. Throughout the book, Thomas Sowell references the concepts of freedom, justice, and equality as being three topics on which the people of the constrained and unconstrained vision rarely agree.
In fact, this trend towards growing inequality is not unique to America's market economy. Across the developed world, inequality has increased. The idea that so many children are born into poverty in the wealthiest nation on earth is heartbreaking enough. But the idea that a child may never be able to escape that poverty because she lacks a decent education or health care, or a community that views her future as their own, that should offend all of us.
Rawls has something which he calls the difference principle, which he says that no policy should be advocated if it does not help those on the bottom. Now, the problem with applying that in the American society is that those on the bottom don't stay on the bottom. In fact, in no quintile of the income distribution do the people tend to stay there. People are constantly moving among these brackets. A study was done some years ago showing that at the end of 8 years, more of the people who were in the bottom 20% at the beginning were now in the top 20% than remained in the bottom 20%. So you have this enormous turnover of people in these brackets, and yet the discussions of income distribution are always discussion of the relationships among those brackets, not among flesh and blood people.
Equality is a concept that both visions tackle from differing starting points. In social systems, those of the constrained vision prefer an equality of processes that don't discriminate and whose procedural indifference serve to promote equal opportunity, as opposed to those of an unconstrained vision, who often base the fairness of any social system on its outcomes, and as such are likely to find any discrepancy in outcome between groups to be unacceptable. Sowell's quote of the constrained view of Milton Friedman is poignant in demonstrating this impasse. A society that puts equality, in the sense of equality of outcome, ahead of freedom, will end up with neither equality nor freedom. It boils down to universal rules or processes versus assigned or designated outcomes. This seems to be an expansion on the idea regarding mankind's ability to create perfection in society. To the constrained mind, the most we can hope for is a fair set of processes that become more optimum but never perfect, while those of the unconstrained mentality see differences in outcome as problematic and presume that mankind, either at present or in the future, can create a perfect equality.
For far too long, injustice was my reality. I watched as a tangled web of mass incarceration emerged, and I call it a tangled web because there's far too many entry points and far fewer exit points. America, as an industrialized nation, has the highest incarceration rate in the world, with over 2 million people incarcerated, and the vast majority of them being people of color. So I watched as a child witness to the war on drugs, as our moms and our dads, our aunts and our uncles, and our brothers and sisters entered into the prison gates. And they were locked up and locked out. And I say locked out because they returned back home with a permanent scarlet letter that read F for felon.
Now, what I call cosmic justice has been called by some people social justice. But I think they're unduly modest because they're trying to correct not only the inequities that they see in society, they're trying to correct the oversights of God or the defects of the cosmos. When some people are born with physical or mental handicaps, they want to counterbalance that. And of course, that's not always caused by society.
Justice is another problem that the visions see in fundamentally different ways. The constrained vision makes the admission that crime is part of human nature and strives to create processes by which to create disincentives for people that commit said crimes. The legal system being an ever-evolving set of rules meant to curb certain socially undesirable behavior, with the end goal being deterrence of as much criminal behavior as circumstances allow. This view is made clear in Sowell's selected quote from economist Adam Smith, which reads, "Society may subsist, though not in the most comfortable state, without beneficence, but the prevalence of injustice must utterly destroy it." To this vision, justice is defined as it relates to protecting a given society. The unconstrained vision, on the other hand, sees crime as being largely socially created, and as such, curable to the extent that society itself can be improved. To those with this view, crime is a symptom of failed systemic processes. The unconstrained also prefer rehabilitation of criminals, who they rarely see as responsible for their own actions, rather than punishment of those criminals via incarceration.
The good news is over the past 4 years, we've helped more responsible homeowners stay in their homes, and today sales are up, and prices are up, and fewer Americans see their homes underwater. But we're not done yet.
Look at the government causing one problem after the other, and I got very frustrated that whether we're victimized as homeowners, whether we're victimized as taxpayers, whether we're victimized as investors, get government out of the way is the only logical conclusion you can have to looking at this mess.
And by the way, what do you think, Dan, he would do? I mean, the president ends that statement by saying we're not done, but he talks about home ownership, he talks about prices being up. Would the government somehow try to stall this? I mean, what could they do now other than mess up what is a pretty okay recovery?
The topic of freedom extends from one of the foundational assumptions mentioned earlier, the locus of decision-making. The notion of freedom of choice, or, as Sowell references it, the locus of discretion, is determined by the worldview or vision we hold. It's not simply in where that locus of discretion or choice is currently, be it in government, families, or individuals, but where it should be that these visions diverge. It is personal choice or individual freedom that is often given more weight in the constrained vision. Although those choices would be limited naturally through the interactions of many individuals, as each individual's decisions are influenced by social, economic, and other factors, and once made, these decisions in turn serve to further influence or limit the decisions of yet still others. As mentioned earlier, this vision often prefers the organic growth from individual and familial decisions outward. The unconstrained vision also values freedom, but the form this freedom takes is hardly recognizable to the constrained mind. In Sowell's own words, in the unconstrained vision, where the crucial factor in promoting the general good are sincerity and articulated knowledge and reason, the dominant influence in society should be that of those who are best in these regards. The unconstrained vision almost always sees the locus of discretion as belonging to those that Sowell references elsewhere as the anointed, a top-down view of power and decision-making stemming from a morally superior intelligentsia. Personal freedom, or freedom of choice, is often a secondary concern for this outlook if it's a consideration at all. Most of the differences in outlook that these two modes of perception encapsulate, according to Sowell, all inevitably lead back to the fundamental or foundational differences in the way they perceive the world. Part 3. Modern Relevance. Sowell's visions, to one extent or another, can still be seen in the political views of many on both the left and the right. Those who are more conservative do typically have a more constrained view of humankind, while far-left liberals may fall more in line with the unconstrained vision. This dichotomy is, however, not always clear, nor is it a tautology. Liberal doesn't mean unconstrained, nor does Republican mean constrained. The positions along the political spectrum may be informed or influenced by the vision one holds, but Sowell suggests that even this underlying vision may change over time, or with road to Damascus conversions. Sowell also warns that as much as these visions may reflect logic or be bolstered by evidence, they are still largely drawn from one's own feelings or intuition about the nature of reality, and as such may fall prey to the mostly illogical nature of feeling, that tendency to double down on bad ideas. I see the value of viewing the arguments and reasoning of the political spectrum in the way that Sowell elaborates in this book. It gives insight into the differences in perspective, not a value difference, as much as a linguistic difference. The terms of each vision mean different things. Freedom has a different definition in each. Justice has incompatible meanings. And the same holds true for much of what is talked about, or, more accurately, talked around. Knowing that these visions are perhaps a cause of continuous political impasse doesn't validate or invalidate either position. It just highlights one explanatory reason why this impasse might be ongoing. Sowell also approaches these same ideas in his books, The Quest for Cosmic Justice, Vision of the Anointed, and Intellectuals in Society. All worth a look, but definitely check out The Conflict of Visions. It's a classic. So, let me know what you guys think about this book, or this video, or the ideas discussed. What vision of the world do you think most describes how you see things? I tend to find myself leaning to a constrained view of reality. Do you? If not, let me know why, in the comments. Thanks as always, guys. Until next time, fill your eyes